Our next speaker is Daniil Serko from the Max Planck Institute for Human Development.
I'm going to present a new study design to study children's adaptive training choices. And by the end of my talk, I will have provided you with empirical evidence that even young children adapt their training choices to the structures and the goals of a task. This project is a joint project with Julia Leonard. She's a professor at the University of Yale. And my supervisor, Azura Ruggeri, she's a professor at the Central European University in Vienna. So before we start, I'd like you to imagine the following situation for a second. Let's say you have a math and an Italian test tomorrow, but you only have 1 hour to practice. What do you practice? Now, the answer to that question is going to depend a lot on your individual abilities. So are you an Italian mother tongue? Are you very good at math? It's going to depend on the structure of a task. So will you have to prove an equation, or will you simply do a multiple choice task? And it's also going to depend on your goals. Perhaps you don't care about the math task at all and you just want to ace the Italian exam, right? So the main question that we tried to address in the study was, can children estimate their abilities? And then based on these estimates, can they make adaptive training choices? We know from research with adult participants that they approach learning situations strategically. So, for example, when participants get to choose from different sets of games, they begin with easy games, they try out all the games, and then eventually they avoid the very difficult games and the very easy games. We also know that adults make reliable predictions about their performance for future tests, and probably, or most likely, they use their metacognitive skills to do so. But with children, the empirical evidence is mixed. So on the one hand, we know that even very young children at infant level have some awareness of their abilities. So for example, infants will use pointing gestures to selectively ask caregivers for help. And we know that beginning from 4 years of age, children will infer the task difficulty of an object from the physical features of it. So for example, they will say or think that it's going to be difficult for another person to operate something that has many knobs compared to an object that has only very few knobs, like 2 buttons only. And the empirical evidence on active information search shows that children are sensitive to the likelihood of games and to the structure and goal of a task. And we also know that even at infant level, children are using model behavior to guide their effort allocation. So for example, when infants see an adult persist in a task, they're more likely to also persist in this task. But on the other hand, we also know that children are overly optimistic and that they often overestimate their abilities. We also know that even if they estimate their abilities correctly, they don't always act upon this. And finally, we know that the understanding of how children understand practice goes through substantial change. And all of this might be connected to the fact that some of their cognitive abilities are still developing. So their metacognitive skills, their working memory, their executive functioning, they might be still going through substantial change. In light of this mixed evidence, our study addressed the following question, or we wanted to study how children make adaptive training choices, and for that we ran 2 experiments with a total of 220 subjects. Everything is pre-registered on OSF. And we focused on 4 to 8-year-old children and adults. Our study design was pretty much the same in both experiments. So children first familiarized with two games. Then we told them about a later test that they will face. And we gave them the choice to practice one of the 2 games before the test. And then we tested them. Yeah, children's decision in the training is our main dependent variable. So experiment 1 was a within subject design. And everything was conducted via Zoom because of the pandemic, and we focused on 4 to 8-year-olds and adults. Children played 2 guessing games, and we manipulated the difficulty of each game by showing them objects or pictures of objects and animals, and covering a certain percentage of the picture. So for example, in the easy game, we covered only a little piece of this pizza slice, and it was very easy to guess what it is. Whereas in the difficult game, we covered a large proportion of the picture, making it very difficult to guess that this is a dog. So what did children actually see on the screen? So the experimenter clicked on one of the cards, it flipped, and then we asked, what is this? And if the child answered correctly, the experimenter said, yes, right, and the child received visual feedback for their answer. And if the child answered incorrectly, then the experimenter said this was incorrectly. But we did never tell the children the correct answers for the cards they did not know. Of course, we counterbalanced which of the two games was difficult and which one was easy. And you might have noticed that one of the items in the easy card game is difficult. And the reason for that was that when we piloted this, we realized that some children avoided the easy game if it was too easy, meaning that 4 of the 4 cards were easy. So we decided to make it easy, but not too easy. Okay, and then after this familiarization, children were randomly assigned to 3 conditions. In the easy condition, we told them, later you'll be tested in this game, pointing to the easy game. In the difficult condition, we told them, later you'll be tested on the on this game, and pointing to the difficult game. And then we had a random condition where we said, later you'll be tested in one of the 2 games, but you cannot know which one it is. And consequently, this resulted in 3 rounds that children entered. And we treated the first round as a training round in our analysis, but it had no statistical difference from the results if we included all rounds. Okay, so here's an example of what children saw in the random condition. They familiarized with the 2 games. One was easy, one was difficult. We asked them in which game they were better as a comprehension check. Then we gave them information about the later test, and to kind of emphasize the randomness of this, we had 2 cards, each representing 2 games. And then the experimenter closed their eyes and said, I'm going to randomly pick 1 card. And then they draw the card and put it next to them and said, later you'll be tested in this game. Then we asked children to make a training choice. And at training, we told them all the correct names for each card they did not know. So please note that these are the same cards as children saw, like the same 4 cards children saw during familiarization, plus 4 new cards. And then after this training, children entered the test and were tested on the same cards, and they could win 1 sticker for each correct answer, and they lost 1 sticker for each incorrect answer. So we predicted that children would adapt their training to the conditions that they're in, and in particular, this means that in the easy condition, they should practice the easy game, so in order to answer just as many cards as possible correctly. In the difficult game, they should practice the difficult game to answer as many cards correctly as possible. And in the random condition, they should also practice the difficult game in order to compensate for the possibility of being tested in the difficult game. And we also predicted that children's ability to make adaptive training choices is going to improve with age. Now, what did we find? This graph is going to show you children's training choice by condition. And the percentage of children choosing the difficult or the easy game at training is on the y-axis. Oh, and the dotted line indicates the the chance level. Okay, and what we find is that about 75% in each condition, 75 of participants in each condition indeed adapt to the training, adapt to the conditions that they're in. Now, the next graph is going to illustrate how this ability changes with age. So age in months is plotted on the x-axis with adults on the very right. And participants' training choice is plotted on the y-axis, and the different conditions that participants were in is in different colors. And we see that young children are kind of choosing at random, and then beginning with 5.5 years, they start to adapt to the conditions, and this improves with age. But now, why did young children fail to adapt? And the reasons for this are there are many different reasons that are possible. So, for example, it's possible that children engaged in wishful thinking. So they might have just been thinking, oh, I'll be just tested in the easy game in the random condition. And they could also just have had a preference for the easy game and kind of avoided the difficult game because it was not fun enough for them or maybe too difficult. Maybe children estimated their abilities correctly, but they had difficulties to plan ahead. And finally, or not yet finally, but they could have had difficulties understanding the instructions. So if you remember the randomness that we illustrated with the cards, I think that randomness could be a somewhat difficult concept for children to grasp. So this is also a possibility of a possible confound. And finally, we had 3 rounds in total, so that it might have been that children just got a little tired. So we tried to avoid these shortcomings by a set of comprehension checks. For example, we asked children whether they know, in a follow-up experiment, we asked children whether they know in which game they will be later tested, and we expected them to say yes in the easy and difficult condition, and to say no in the random condition. We also implemented more child-friendly games just to make it more fun for them, and we reduced everything to 1 round only to kind of address the fatigue aspect. Okay, so experiment 2 focused on 4 and 5-year-olds only, 25 children per condition. They were tested in person this time in the zoo, and the study design was the same, so children familiarized with 2 games. We informed them about the later test, asked them what they want to train, and then we tested them. The familiarization was a little bit different, so children saw 2 boxes, and then the experimenter opened 1 box and showed them these easy-to-stack blocks and said, can you build a tower with them? Children built a tower. And then the experimenter put out those oddly shaped blocks, and they were difficult to stack, and the experimenter asked the children to stack those. Then, of course, we asked like which game was easy, which game was difficult, and we counterbalanced all the colors in the order. And then children were randomly assigned to an easy condition, a difficult condition, and a random condition. And the random condition in this case was a little bit special. So there were 2 other boxes in a testing area, and the experimenter opened one and said, look, these blocks are the same as these blocks, and these blocks are the same as these blocks. And then the experimenter closed both boxes, closed their eyes, and started to shuffle the boxes, and said that by the count of 3, I'm going to randomly pick one of the boxes. And of course, we asked the children whether they know what is inside the box, and we expected them to say no. Okay, and we predicted the children will adapt to the structure and the goal of the task, so they will practice the easy game in the easy condition, the difficult game in the difficult and the random condition. And here are our results. So the percentage of children's training choices is again on the y-axis, and the conditions they were facing is on the x-axis. And we again find that about 75% of children do adapt to the conditions they face. Now there are several, but I'm going to leave this open for a second so you can have another look. Okay, so there are a couple of open questions still. And in experiment 2, we provided a lot of scaffolding, and I think future experiments would be really interesting to look at how much scaffolding is really mandatory and how much is just optional and we can maybe leave out. And then a project that I'm currently running with my colleague is where we want to look at how children are able to generalize their estimates. So if they play one game, can they understand that a game that is similar in structure may be also something they can, that is easy for them or difficult for them? And finally, we could also look at this coming more from a social direction. So what is if children observe peers and adults perform something, can they infer how difficult it's going to be for them? Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. I've showed you a new experimental study design to study children's adaptive training choices, and I've provided you with empirical evidence that provided enough scaffolding, even young children can adapt their training choices, and with age, this ability improves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniil, for the very interesting talk. Questions, comments?
Thank you, that was very interesting. I had a question regarding the performance of children in the two tests, the easy and the difficult one, depending on their age. So I was wondering, especially for younger children, might it be adaptive for them to train in the easy condition because that's where they perform, so they can learn something, even though it's not what they're going to be tested on, then they have some knowledge at least.
Could you repeat the last part of your question? I'm sorry,
Sure,
I had difficulties hearing you.
Yeah, sorry, I'll try and bring that closer. For younger children, if they struggle to perform in a difficult task,
Yeah.
it could maybe be adaptive for them to train in the easy task, even though they'll be tested in a difficult task, because at least they're learning something from that. What do you think about this, and do you have data on their performance?
Oh yeah, I mean, we do have data on their performance, but if I understand you correctly, then, I mean, yes, but that should be ruled out in experiment 2, right? So,
I'm not sure.
I mean, it's possible that, I don't know why children exactly chose to play the easy game, even though they were facing the difficult condition, and about 25% in the difficult condition were doing so, of the young kids. But it's something we should, so if children were doing that, then we should see more like a, sorry, I had difficulty understanding your question.
So maybe another suggestion, if the easy and the difficult task were dependent on how much children can actually perform at their age, would you see something different, and would they perhaps be able to train in a difficult condition more? Because it's something they can do and actually train in.
So the difficult condition would be?
Adapted, would change depending on the age. So it would be a bit less difficult for the younger ones because they cannot do the same.
We were thinking about doing something like that, but then the difficulty would be to compare the conditions. So to make it, so we were thinking of having like levels for the younger kids and then levels for the older kids. But yeah, that would be interesting to look at, but we haven't done that. Thank you.
Thanks.
I think just to follow up on that question and comment, I think one of the challenges with the design as it's currently implemented is that the easy task and the difficult task really are underlying the same task on just the spectrum, right? It's the same challenge. So it may be potentially more informative to the questions at hand if the easy and the difficult task were two different sorts of tasks, so that younger children who were struggling, perhaps, you know, it may enhance your results a little bit and provide more clarity between easy and difficult and the choices that children make if they're not on the same spectrum, if they're not the same underlying task.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think, so we ran a preliminary study where we had exactly this. So we had a task where children had to guess animals from sounds and animals from pictures, which would, if I understand you correctly, be exactly this. So we are tapping on two different domains, kind of. So yeah, I mean, definitely that would be something we could consider to implement in a different way in the future.
Any more questions?
Thank you. I was wondering specifically what the children were told about the training phase and whether you might expect children to respond differently if you told them that they were going to learn all of the correct answers versus they were going to get a chance to practice the two games.
Are you speaking of experiment 2 or experiment 1?
Of experiment 1 with the younger children.
Experiment 2 was with the younger children. So here we focused on 4 and 5-year-olds only.
Sorry, so in experiment 1, when you ran it with just the younger age group, because then they started to differentiate, but with the original animal picture task, when they were shown all of the correct answers, I wondered if children were told that they were going to see all of the correct answers versus just get a chance to practice the game, and whether those two instructions might change how younger children interpreted.
Yeah, so what we did in experiment 1 was we told them simply which of the 2 games do you want to play again, and then we asked them again, what is this? And then in case they didn't know, we provided them with the correct answer, but we didn't use the term practice or something. And in experiment 2, we again asked them which of the 2 games do you want to practice, and one thing that we asked them before is that whether they think they can get better in each of the games. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniil.